All right, today we're tackling a geopolitical puzzle that, on the surface, just doesn't make any sense. But according to our source material for this explainer, there's a kind of hidden playbook. Three simple strategies, really, that might just explain how global power has worked for decades. So let's get into it.
Okay, so it all kicks off with this one big question. Just this year, India and Iran signed this huge multi-billion-dollar deal for the Chabahar port. And what does the United States do? It threatens sanctions. Now, hold on a second. Isn't India supposed to be one of America's closest allies, its greatest friend?
And this is where it gets really weird, right? On one hand, you have US presidents for years calling India a faithful and loyal friend, even one of the defining relationships of the 21st century. But then, the moment India makes a move that's clearly in its own economic interest, all that friendly talk just evaporates, and it's replaced with the threat of sanctions. So, what's the deal? What explains this massive disconnect? Well, to really get our heads around this, the source for this explainer says we need to look at a strategic playbook that the US has supposedly been running for a very long time. And the best way to see it in action is to use US-Iran relations as a kind of case study. Once you look at that history, a pattern starts to emerge, and it breaks down into three key strategies. Okay, let's dive into the first part of this playbook. The source calls this strategy the puppet masters. And yeah, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's all about controlling a country's valuable resources by, well, controlling its leadership. The strategy is actually pretty simple on paper. You find a country that's rich in resources, you help install a leader who's friendly to your interests, and then you get that new leader to pass laws that basically let you pull those resources right out of the ground for a massive profit. And for this, the source points to one prime example: Iran. So the story really kicks off back in 1908, when these huge oil reserves are discovered in Iran. For the next few decades, a British-owned company basically controlled it all and made a fortune. But then, in 1951, Iran's democratically elected leader, a man named Mohammad Mossadegh, decided, you know what, this oil belongs to the Iranian people, and he nationalized the oil fields. Well, you can probably guess that this move didn't go over too well in the West, and just 2 years later, a coup, reportedly orchestrated by the CIA and MI6, kicked Mossadegh out and put the pro-Western Shah in power. And if you want to know why he did it, just look at this chart. It's absolutely wild. Before he nationalized the oil, Iran was only getting 14%, that's 1/4, of the profits from its own oil. A whopping 86% was going straight to Britain. I mean, it was an incredibly one-sided deal, and Mossadegh was determined to change that. So after the coup, what's the first thing the Shah does? He immediately reverses the nationalization. And just like that, American and British oil giants like Exxon and Mobil came flooding right back in. For the next quarter century, they pulled billions and billions of dollars out of Iran's oil fields, and at the same time sold the Shah billions in weapons to help him keep his tight grip on power. But, what happens when your puppet gets overthrown and you suddenly lose that control? Well, that brings us right to strategy number 2: weaponize the opposition. The thinking here, according to the source, is pretty straightforward. If you can't control a country from the inside anymore, you create total chaos on its borders. You find a rival neighbor, you give them money and weapons, and you basically fuel a conflict that keeps your real target so bogged down and distracted that they can't challenge your interests. And this strategy apparently became the go-to plan in 1979. That's when the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah. And the new leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, renationalized the oil fields all over again. And just like that, the US lost what the source calls its golden goose. Now, trying to whip up an opposition to Khomeini from inside Iran was seen as pretty much impossible. The guy was just too popular. So the US zoomed out its map, looked next door, and found a potential new player in the game: Iraq, led by none other than Saddam Hussein. And that brings us to a really critical year, a major turning point: 1982. Okay, get this. Before 1982, the US officially had Iraq on its list of state sponsors of terrorism. But after 1982, poof, suddenly Iraq is taken off that list and starts getting all kinds of US aid. We're talking military tech, even components for biological weapons. This complete flip-flop, the source argues, was all about building up Iraq to be a weapon against Iran. And the result was the absolutely brutal 8-year-long Iran-Iraq war. The human cost was just catastrophic. Over 500,000 people killed, and a combined economic loss of $1 trillion for both countries. So while the entire region was just devastated, the source argues that the US not only strengthened its geopolitical hand, but also profited from selling all those weapons. And that brings us to the third and, you could say, the final piece of this playbook. This one is less about brute force and more about something else entirely: marketing. It's about public perception. Yeah, this third strategy is really all about the spin. The idea is to take actions that are really about protecting your own economic and strategic goals, but you frame them for the public as these incredibly noble missions. You're not just intervening, you're promoting democracy, or you're fighting for peace, or you're engaging in a humanitarian intervention. And the source claims this playbook is absolutely still in use today. The only thing that's changed is the geography. The focus has shifted from the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific. Now, the stated goal is to counter China's rise, but the public justification, the marketing slogan, is all about creating a free and open region. It's the same strategy, just a different map. But what's the real cost of these so-called humanitarian interventions? The numbers, they're just staggering. One study estimates that these actions have displaced 37 million people around the world. 37 million. That is an immense amount of suffering, all under the banner of help. And every now and then, the mask slips. You get these horrific events, like the photos of prisoner abuse that came out of the Abu Ghraib prison, that reveal a reality that is just so much darker than the positive story we're being sold. It's moments like those that really expose the massive gap between the PR campaign and the grim reality on the ground. And it makes that greater good story a whole lot harder to believe. Okay, so we've just walked through this whole three-part playbook. How does this all loop back to our original question? The one about the US, India, and Iran. Well, here's the bottom line according to the source. Countries like India have been paying attention. They've seen this playbook run before. They get it. And because they've seen these historical patterns play out, they're just not willing to blindly follow orders anymore, especially when those orders don't help them. They're choosing to carve out their own path, even if that means pushing back against a superpower. And this isn't just an India story. It points to a much bigger shift, where a lot of other countries are starting to assert themselves, creating a world with many centers of power. And this really leaves us with a fundamental debate about what power even is. It boils down to two competing philosophies. You've got the Machiavellian view, which says to stay on top, you have to be willing to do some pretty nasty things behind the scenes while keeping up a positive public image. And then you have this other idea, that real, lasting power comes from ethics, from genuine development, and from actually lifting others up. And that, really, is the ultimate question this whole analysis leaves us with. As this new world order begins to take shape, with new powers rising and challenging the old ways, which path will win out? Is power always going to be about domination? Or is there another way? A path to leadership that's built on cooperation and shared growth? The choices our leaders make today are definitely going to define the world we all live in tomorrow.